The night was supposed to be a celebration. After 37 years at the firm, I was retiring with a handshake, a plaque, and a lifetime of carefully managed memories. The ballroom at the Cambridge Club was glowing. Tall windows wrapped in golden curtains, jazz humming low under clinking glasses. Colleagues and clients gathered in clusters, sipping Chardonnay and recalling cases from decades past. Claire, my wife of 40 years, had just squeezed my hand. Our son and daughter, both adults now, stood nearby with bittersweet smiles. Everything was where it should be, safe, predictable, until my brother Daniel stood up. He hadn't said much all evening, sat quiet at a corner table, nursing a single drink. But now, without a word, he rose, gripping an old leather folder in both hands, the kind our father used to carry to court back in the 70s, faded, cracked at the edges, with a tarnished brass zipper. I hadn't seen that folder in over 20 years, and neither had Thomas Green. Thomas, our family's longtime lawyer, had been in the middle of a toast, but the moment he spotted the folder, he stopped mid-sentence. His voice caught, his eyes locked on the worn leather like it was radioactive. The room grew still. Laughter faded. A violinist missed a note. Even the servers paused. "Where did you get that?" Thomas asked, his voice low but sharp. It wasn't a question of curiosity. It was fear. Daniel didn't answer. He looked at me, and in that moment something inside my chest shifted. A tightening, not panic, not yet, but the sensation of a buried truth clawing its way to the surface. Something we thought we had sealed up long ago. "Daniel," I said, trying to smile, keeping my voice light. "This really isn't—" But he didn't care. He placed the folder on the podium, unzipped it slowly, the metallic sound unnaturally loud, and pulled out a stack of documents. At the top of the pile was a photo, old, curled at the corners, yellowed like parchment, and I knew that photo. I knew it the moment I saw it, because I burned it, or thought I did. For a second I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the image itself that rattled me. It was what it meant, that it still existed, that he had it. The photograph was taken in 1982, a family picnic at Walden Pond. Our parents were still alive. Daniel and I stood side by side, squinting into the summer sun, arms awkwardly at our sides. But it wasn't us who haunted the picture. It was the boy. Off to the corner, nearly out of frame, a small figure, barefoot, dirty jeans, holding a slingshot. His name wasn't written on the back. No one ever acknowledged him. But I remembered. I remembered everything. The lawyer was still frozen, one hand gripping the podium's edge. Claire leaned in, whispering, "What's going on?" But I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone dry. My pulse thudded in my ears like a slow drum. Daniel finally spoke. "Before Dad died, he told me to burn this folder," he said, voice steady. "Told me to destroy everything inside it, but I didn't." Murmurs rippled through the room. Thomas stepped forward, face pale. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Daniel's gaze didn't shift. "How you think I didn't read them?" he asked. "You think I didn't recognize that boy or understand what our father did?" Claire's fingers tightened on my arm. I wanted to stop him, to pull the microphone, to laugh it all off as some twisted joke. But I couldn't move, because deep down I knew Daniel wasn't bluffing. I remembered the last time I saw that boy. I remembered what our father made me promise. And I remembered the letter, the one sealed in the same folder, now lying open like a wound. "Daniel," I said, voice shaking. "Not here." He turned toward me. "It should have happened a long time ago, Matthew." He held up the photo, just enough for those nearest to see, and then laid it gently on the podium, like a relic. And beneath it, I saw the edge of the envelope. The same envelope I had handed to our father 35 years ago, back when I thought it was possible to erase a past, to bury it like bones no one would dig up. But Daniel had dug, and now everyone was watching, waiting, for the truth I had sworn never to speak. Growing up, Daniel and I weren't just brothers. We were opposites orbiting the same sun. He was impulsive, always asking why, and never accepting silence as an answer. I, on the other hand, learned early that silence was safer, especially in our house. Our father, Richard Crane, was a towering man in stature and reputation, a decorated trial attorney in Boston, known for never losing a case, never flinching under pressure. At home he ruled with the same precision. He didn't yell, he didn't hit. But his disapproval, that quiet surgical dissection of your every word, cut deeper than any belt ever could. By the time I turned 10, I understood the rules. Speak when spoken to. Always stand straight. Never contradict him in public. And whatever happened behind closed doors stayed there. Daniel never learned those rules. He questioned. He pushed. And when he couldn't get answers, he withdrew. Not out of fear, but something else. Resentment, maybe, or grief. Our mother, Elaine, was a gentle presence, but distant. She floated through the house like a ghost with perfect hair. She drank Chardonnay at 4, then gin by 7. I think she loved us, in her own way, but she was already halfway gone by the time I started high school. That summer at Walden Pond, the one from the photo, it wasn't a vacation, it was a cover. Our father had insisted we all go. Rented a cabin, packed sandwiches, forced smiles. I remember standing by the lake skipping rocks while Daniel sat reading under a tree. That boy, the one in the photo, he showed up out of nowhere. A neighbor's kid, our father had said. But I knew better. I'd seen him before in the garage, in hushed conversations at the back of the house. I once caught our father writing checks he never explained. And one night, I overheard something, a fight, between our father and Thomas Green, long before he became our family lawyer. They argued in the study, doors shut but voices raised. Something about liability and keeping it quiet. I was 15, and I didn't understand it all, but I remember one word standing out like a knife: paternity. That was the first time I felt the ground shift beneath our family. And years later, when our father was dying, I found that envelope, tucked deep in the filing cabinet in the attic, sealed. Yellowed. My name scrawled across the front in his hard, sharp handwriting. I didn't open it, I couldn't. Instead, I brought it to him, and he made me promise. Burn it. With the folder. No one else needs to carry this. But Daniel never let things go. And somehow, impossibly, he found it all. Daniel was 4 years younger than me, but sometimes it felt like we were born in different centuries. Where I smoothed tension, he stirred it. Where I avoided questions, he hunted answers like a bloodhound. After college, I joined the same firm where our father built his legend. I married Claire, bought the house in Brookline, raised 2 kids, coached Little League, paid my taxes. Daniel drifted. He studied anthropology, then dropped out. Spent a few years in Arizona, then Alaska. I never knew where he was for long. He'd surface for holidays or funerals, bringing strange stories, odd gifts, and questions no one wanted to answer. I used to tell Claire, Daniel's just wired differently. But what I meant was Daniel remembered. He remembered the night our father made him stay in the garage for hours as punishment, at age 10, for losing a watch. He remembered our mother crying behind the laundry room door. He remembered the neighbors whispering after that boy stopped showing up, the boy with the slingshot. And he never let me forget that I did nothing. Not then. Not when I found the folder years later. Not when I handed it back to the man who caused the damage. Not even when I stood beside our father's casket, my eulogy neatly written, rehearsed, and utterly hollow. Daniel didn't attend the funeral, sent a postcard from Anchorage instead, a black and white photo of a glacier with 4 words scrawled in red ink: "Truth doesn't stay buried." Claire told me to throw it away. I did, but I remembered the phrase. Now standing at my retirement party with that same man, older, sharper, with grey at his temples, holding that same folder I thought was ash, the years collapsed. I wasn't a partner, or a father, or a husband. I was a boy again, caught between silence and truth, and I hated that part of me, was grateful Daniel didn't let it go. But I also hated him for doing this, for choosing this moment, with my family watching, with my name about to be etched into the firm's legacy wall. He could have waited. He didn't. Because Daniel always believed pain needed daylight. After our father died, I thought it was over. The weight, the secrets, the unfinished sentences, all of it. I told myself, that when we buried him, we buried the worst of what he was. But Daniel knew better. He always did. The last time we spoke, really spoke, was 2 years after the funeral. He'd come back through Boston, staying in a borrowed loft in South End. He asked to meet at a diner we used to go to as kids. I remember the smell of burnt coffee and the way the vinyl seat stuck to my shirt. He slid a small photo across the table. Not the one from the folder. Another one. A Polaroid. Of the boy. A little older, maybe 12. Still barefoot. Still staring through the camera like he knew it was a trap. Daniel tapped the picture. His name was Evan. You know that, right? I didn't answer. Couldn't. He kept going. You knew. All those years. You knew he was ours. His. And you stayed quiet. I was trying to protect us, I said. I didn't even believe myself when I said it. Daniel leaned in. No, Matt. You were protecting him. You were always his favorite, the golden son. That stung more than it should have, because deep down I had believed it too. When I found the folder, after Dad's first stroke, I'd opened it just long enough to see the names, the paternity test, the payments, the private agreement, and the letter, addressed not to the boy but to me. Matthew, do what I could not. End this right. I hadn't ended anything. I'd lit a fire in the backyard and tossed the folder in like it was garbage, but part of me held back. I couldn't destroy the envelope, couldn't bring myself to open it either. I'd sealed it again and slid it into a drawer, until the guilt got louder than the silence. I drove to our father's grave one afternoon in winter, snow falling sideways, and buried the envelope beneath the headstone. I told myself that was closure, that it was over. But Daniel never stopped looking. He dug through records, tracked old addresses, found people I'd forgotten existed. I told myself he was obsessed, broken. Now I see it for what it was. He was the only one brave enough to want the truth, no matter how much it cost. And now, standing at this podium with Claire beside me, my grown children watching and every professional accolade I ever wanted lining the walls, I saw what Daniel was about to do. Not just for Evan, but for me. And I hated him for it. Even as I needed him to finish what I never had the courage to begin. Claire's hand had slipped from mine. I didn't notice at first, but when I reached for her, it was already too late. Her arms were crossed, eyes narrowed, locked not on me, but on Daniel, on the folder, on the photograph that now sat exposed like an open wound in the middle of my retirement celebration. Thomas Green was still standing beside the podium, visibly shaken. He was no longer the composed attorney who managed our estate, handled the trusts, and toasted my career with effortless grace. He looked like a man cornered by a ghost. My children, Emily and Ryan, exchanged a glance. A small instinctive flick of the eyes between siblings who had grown up in a house where certain topics were never mentioned. They didn't know details, but they knew something had always been missing. Daniel picked up the envelope. The room hushed again. It was almost holy the way he handled it, like scripture or a confession sealed for decades. He didn't speak yet, just held it up. 35 years, he said finally, voice even, like a judge reading a verdict. That's how long this letter has stayed sealed. My father wrote it. My brother was the only one it was meant for. He looked at me, his eyes softening just enough to scare me. He didn't read it, Daniel said. He never read it. Someone in the back gasped. Claire looked at me sharp. You didn't, she whispered. I couldn't answer. Daniel continued. I don't blame him, not entirely. We were boys when it started. We were sons of a man who taught us that truth was dangerous. That silence was a kind of love. A beat passed. No one moved. Even the waitstaff stood still. But silence, Daniel said, has a weight, and we've all been carrying it. I felt it then, a heat rising behind my eyes, not from embarrassment, from shame, because everything he was saying was true, and yet I wanted to stop him. I wanted to protect the fiction I had spent my entire life building, that our family had endured, that I had done the right thing, that some things were better left buried, but I could feel that fiction collapsing, inch by inch, under the weight of a single envelope. Daniel opened it. The flap tore like dry paper bark, deliberate, slow, final. Thomas stepped forward, panic in his voice now. "Daniel, don't. This isn't the place." Daniel didn't flinch. "It's the only place. The truth belongs to all of us now." And then, from inside the envelope, he pulled out a single sheet of letterhead. Our father's handwriting, sharp, heavy, undeniable. He began to read, and I wished, with everything in me, that I could disappear. Daniel unfolded the page slowly. The sound of paper creasing filled the silence. I watched his hands, the same hands I once held as a boy when we were too scared to sleep, now steady, now resolute. His voice broke the hush. "Matthew." He paused, eyes scanning the room. Everyone was listening now, even the caterer had stopped mid-pour. "If you're reading this, it means you've chosen to open what I could not bring myself to say aloud, and for that I both thank you and envy you, because this truth, as terrible as it is, should not die with me." Claire drew in a sharp breath. "His name was Evan. He was my son, yours and Daniel's half-brother, born of a mistake I never corrected and a silence I forced upon everyone. His mother was someone I should have protected. I failed her. I failed him. I failed all of you." My legs felt weak. I reached for the edge of the table, gripping the linen with white knuckles. I paid for his care, kept him hidden, not out of shame for him, but shame of myself. And when I asked Matthew to burn this letter, it wasn't to protect the family. It was to protect myself from the judgment I know I deserve. Daniel's voice stayed steady, but I could see it in his face. The pain, the weight, the slow cracking grief beneath decades of silence. "If you're reading this aloud, Daniel, then I suspect you've done what I couldn't. I was proud of your defiance, even when I punished it. Maybe especially then." He paused again. Something flickered behind his eyes, a brief shudder. Then he read the final lines. "This truth belongs to more than just me. It belongs to you all. Do not make the mistake I made. Do not let silence rot your roots. Give him back his name." Daniel folded the letter in half. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the silence that followed was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. And then, slowly, Claire turned to me. "You knew," she said. Not a question, a sentence. My daughter stepped closer. "Dad, how long?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Because how do you explain to your children that everything you built was balanced on a lie? That your success, your stability, your legacy came not just from hard work, but from the careful burial of a boy whose name was never spoken? I didn't know what to say, but I knew this. The past had just stood up and walked into the room, and it was never going to leave again. The applause had stopped long ago. Whatever joy had filled the air earlier, the jokes, the clinking glasses, the nostalgia, had vanished, leaving only this dense, suffocating silence. The kind that settles in your chest and won't let go. I could feel their eyes on me. Colleagues, friends, partners who had once introduced me on panels, invited me to weddings, asked for advice over bourbon at the club. They weren't seeing Matthew Crane, senior partner, tonight. They were seeing something else. Something raw, fractured, complicit. My daughter Emily stepped toward the podium. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step a verdict. "You knew about Evan?" she asked again. Her voice was soft, but not kind. I managed to nod. Barely. Claire stared at me like she didn't recognize my face. "You let me raise our children," she said slowly, "in a house built on lies." "It wasn't like that," I said. My voice was hollow, weak. I didn't know how to... "Did you ever think about telling them?" Daniel interrupted, not cruel, just firm. "Or me, after Dad died?" He gestured to the folder, now slumped open on the podium like a body. "You had years, Matt." I looked down, ashamed. "I thought it would only bring pain." Claire laughed, short and sharp like glass breaking. "And this? What is this then?" The guests had begun to stir, gathering coats, exchanging glances. A few offered awkward smiles like they didn't know whether to console me or avoid me entirely. Thomas Green approached, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," he muttered. "No," I said quietly, "but maybe it's how it had to." Emily took the photo from the podium, the old one from Walden Pond. She studied it like it might still move, might still tell her something more. Her brow furrowed. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Where's Evan?" I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me, and I saw it. In the way his mouth tensed, the way his eyes dropped. I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not for himself, for me, because Daniel had gone farther than I ever dared. He hadn't just opened the folder. He'd found Evan. And whatever came next was going to change everything. Daniel didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, not with anger, not with triumph, with pity. And somehow, that was worse. "I found him last year," he said. "It took time. Old records, dead addresses, closed adoption files. But I found him." Claire brought her hand to her mouth. Emily whispered, "Oh my God." Ryan stepped back like someone had punched him. "He lives in Portland," Daniel continued. "Oregon, works construction, has a kid, a son." My knees nearly buckled. "He's a father?" I asked, voice hoarse. Daniel nodded. "His name is Caleb. He's 8. 8. A grandson I never knew I had. A boy carrying my father's blood, his shadow and none of his name." Claire turned to me, eyes burning. "So he never even knew about us?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't think so." "But you never asked," she shot back. I couldn't argue. I hadn't asked. I had buried it all, sealed the box in my mind and called it protection. But it was cowardice, plain and sharp. "He wants to meet," Daniel said. My heart thudded. "Meet who?" I asked. "Me." Daniel hesitated. "All of us." The room blurred. I sat down, suddenly cold. Thomas Green stepped closer. "Matt, you need to think carefully, legally, emotionally." "Stop," Daniel said, cutting him off. "This isn't about legalities. This is about a man who grew up believing he didn't exist to the people who should have claimed him." I looked up at Daniel. "And you just brought this here? To this room? Why? To punish me?" Daniel shook his head. "No. To free us." That word, free, landed hard. Because I hadn't felt free in decades. Not really. Not since the night I found the folder and chose fear over courage. Daniel reached into the folder one last time and pulled out something small. A silver chain. A broken bracelet. I knew it immediately. It had belonged to Evan. A simple silver ID bracelet. The kind kids wore in the 70s, engraved with a name. It was scratched, worn down, but still legible. Evan R.C. Richard Crane. Our father. His father. "He kept it," Daniel said quietly. "All these years." No one moved. The bracelet hung between us like a question, and I knew, with a depth that shook me, that I would have to answer it. Not later, not someday. Now. I stared at the bracelet in Daniel's hand, its metal dulled with age, but the name still etched in it like a scar. Evan R.C. It should have been on his wrist all these years, not in a folder, not buried in a house full of secrets. I reached for it. Daniel didn't pull away. He let me hold it. It was smaller than I remembered, lighter too, but the moment I closed my fingers around it, I felt the full weight of what it carried. Evan. He had a name, a life, a son, a history I had erased without ever touching him. "I was 21 when he was born," I said, voice barely audible. "Dad told me it was a one-time mistake. He swore the mother had agreed to keep it private. He said she didn't want contact, that Evan would be fine." Claire's eyes were wide with disbelief. "And you believed him?" "I needed to," I said. "We were building our life. You were pregnant with Emily. I didn't know how to carry it all. You didn't even try." She didn't say it with rage. She said it like a funeral. Daniel sat beside me. "He looks like you know. Not Dad. You." That did something to me. Cut past every defense. I pressed the bracelet to my chest and closed my eyes. "I don't know what I would even say to him," I whispered. "What do you say to a man whose existence you tried to erase?" Daniel leaned in, his voice low and steady. "You don't say anything, Matt. You listen. You let him be angry. You let him speak. You let him tell his story, the one none of us had the guts to hear." I opened my eyes. Claire was crying quietly. Emily and Ryan stood behind her, still processing. Hurt, hesitant, Ryan finally spoke. "So, what now? He just walks into our lives?" Daniel turned toward him. "He doesn't want your house or your name. He doesn't need your approval. He just wants the truth, a chance to stand in the same room and not feel like a ghost." I looked at the bracelet again. It wasn't just a token. It was a key. And it was time to open a door I had locked so tightly I'd forgotten it existed. "I want to see him," I said. My voice cracked. "I want to meet him." No one applauded, but Daniel nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. After the guests had gone, slipping out in awkward clusters, leaving behind half-finished wine glasses and untouched cake, we stayed. No one spoke. Thomas had taken the folder. Daniel had disappeared outside for air. Only my family remained inside the ballroom: Claire, Emily, Ryan, and me. The lights had dimmed, but nothing could dull the weight in the room. Claire sat at the edge of the dance floor, hands clasped in her lap. The same hands I had held the day we got married, the same hands that rocked our children to sleep. Now they were clenched, not in anger, but in something quieter, sadder. "I thought I knew who I married," she said softly, eyes fixed on the shadows. I moved toward her but stopped short. "You do," I said. She turned toward me. "No, Matt. I knew the man who came home every night. I knew the man who brought me flowers on Tuesdays and mowed the lawn in straight lines. But this," her voice caught, "you've been living next to a locked room for 40 years, and you never even gave me the key." I sat down, a few feet away. I didn't dare reach for her. "I was scared," I said, and I told myself it was kindness. Her eyes burned into me. "It was cowardice." I nodded. "Yes." There was a long pause. Then Emily sat beside Claire. Ryan stood behind them both, arms crossed. "You told us to be honest," Emily said. "You told us to stand up for what's right." "I know. So why didn't you?" "Because I was trying to survive. Because I didn't know how to make space for someone I never held. Because I was afraid if I looked too closely, I'd see the worst parts of our father staring back at me. But I didn't say any of that. I just whispered." I failed. Ryan spoke next, quieter than usual. "Do you even want to be his father now?" I looked up at him. "I don't know if I have the right." Claire finally turned to face me. "You don't get to decide that, Matt, not anymore." I closed my eyes. The bracelet was still in my pocket, warm from my palm. A name engraved into silver. A life pressed into metal. A truth I had denied for half my life. The doors to the ballroom creaked open. Daniel stepped back inside, and behind him stood a man I didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, eyes wary, jaw tight. But I knew who he was. Before a word was said, I stood up, my legs trembling. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Matt, this is Evan." Evan didn't say anything when he entered. He just stood there. His boots were dusty, his jeans stiff with travel. He held a baseball cap in one hand, the other curled into a fist at his side. His hair was short, flecked with grey at the temples. He looked older than 35. He looked tired, and he looked like me. The room froze around him. Claire rose, her mouth parting, not in greeting but in recognition. Emily and Ryan stood still, their faces unreadable. Only Daniel moved, guiding Evan forward, slowly, like introducing someone to sacred ground. I stepped toward him. 2 feet away I stopped. His eyes locked onto mine, deep brown, cautious, guarded but not empty. "I don't know what to say," I managed. Evan nodded once. "That makes 2 of us." His voice was low, steady, the voice of someone who's been forced to grow up without anyone to speak for him. "I never meant to disappear you," I said. I believed things I shouldn't have. I trusted the wrong man, and I was afraid of what it would cost. He let out a slow breath through his nose. It cost me. That landed harder than anything else had that night. Claire took a step forward. "You have a son?" she asked gently. Evan nodded. "His name's Caleb. He likes space and sharks. Thinks gravity's a suggestion." A soft smile flickered across Claire's face, the first hint of light in hours. "I'd like to meet him," she said. Evan's eyes flicked back to me. "Why now?" I swallowed. "Because I should have done it the day you were born." I pulled the bracelet from my pocket, held it out. "I remember when I first saw this," I said. "You were maybe 4. You wore it like armor." He looked at it, didn't take it. "You gave it back once," he said. "Did you forget that?" I didn't remember. "I brought it to your father's house when I was 15, he said. "Left it in the mailbox. Thought it might mean something." Daniel's face darkened. "He never told me." "Of course he didn't." Evan stepped forward, gently took the bracelet from my hand. "Truth doesn't fix everything," he said. "But it starts something." He turned toward the door. "I'm not here for an apology," he said over his shoulder. "I came to see if you had the guts to say my name out loud." He paused. "Then, and you did." The door opened. Light spilled in from the hall. He looked back once, then disappeared down the corridor. Daniel followed, and I stood there, holding the ghost of a child I never raised. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't hiding anything. It was holding space for something new. He was gone. The echo of the door closing felt like a closing chapter, or the beginning of one I was never meant to read. We didn't speak for a long time. Not Daniel, not Claire, not the kids. The ballroom was nearly empty, save for one table still holding the centerpiece. A vase of white tulips, slightly wilting like everything else. Daniel eventually returned, but he didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes lowered. "He wasn't sure he'd come in," he said quietly. "I told him he deserved to look you in the eye." Claire nodded, her jaw tight. "He did." I sat down, not in my seat, but in the chair Evan had stood beside. I stared at the spot he had occupied, still warm, still echoing with presence, and it hit me with a force I couldn't have imagined. I had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, and not once had I imagined that I would survive it. Emily sat down next to me. She didn't say anything. She just reached out, hesitantly, and placed her hand on my shoulder. Ryan followed, sitting opposite, his eyes on mine. No anger, no accusations, just something I hadn't earned, something that looked like mercy. "I want to meet him," Ryan said. "So do I," Emily added. Claire stood across from us, still unmoving. "But not just him," she said. "I want to meet you, Matt." Her voice cracked. "The man who lived with this, the one you never let me see." I looked up at her. "I don't know if I can be that man." "Then don't," she whispered. "Be better." Daniel finally stepped forward. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second photo. A recent one. Evan with a boy, Caleb presumably, on his shoulders, laughing on a beach. A tiny plastic shark in the boy's hand, both of them smiling in the same crooked way. He placed it on the table in front of me. "No more hiding," Daniel said. "From him, or from yourself." I nodded. Tears fell. Quiet, undramatic, real. And when I looked down at that photo, I didn't see the years I had lost. I saw the years that were still left. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt still. I felt present. The next morning, the house was still. Claire had gone to stay with Emily for a few days. She said she needed space. I didn't argue. I needed it too. Not to think, but to feel. That was always the problem. I'd built a life around managing facts, not emotions. But there was no spreadsheet for this. No retirement plaque to polish this into legacy. Just absence. I sat at the kitchen table with the bracelet in my hand. Not clenched, just resting there, letting it be what it always was. A small, indestructible reminder of what I never claimed. My father died with a secret he couldn't bear to live with. And I almost did the same. But Daniel, for all his defiance, his chaos, his refusal to let things lie, did what none of us could. He brought the silence to its knees. I thought about Evan's face, the hesitation in his eyes, the strength in his voice, and the unimaginable courage it took for him to walk through those doors last night. Not to accuse me, not to humiliate me, just to exist. I thought about Caleb too, a boy who'd grown up without his grandfather, not because I was dead, but because I chose not to be real. I could never reclaim the years I missed, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point wasn't to undo the past, but to let it become soil, something to grow in. I took out the photo Daniel had given me, Evan and Caleb, on a beach, laughing like the world never hurt them, and for the first time, I didn't feel unworthy of it. I felt invited. Forgiveness doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in a look, a gesture, a choice to show up anyway. I don't know if Evan will ever call me Dad. I don't know if I deserve it. But I'll be there. Every day he'll let me. 2 weeks later, I stood on a sidewalk in Portland. Evan had agreed to meet me at a park, neutral ground. No expectations, no family speeches, just time. He arrived late, wary. His son, Caleb, bounced out of the car first, holding a red plastic shark. "Hi," he said, squinting up at me. "Are you the guy with the bracelet?" I smiled, kneeling slowly. "Yeah, buddy, that's me." Evan walked up behind him, his eyes still guarded, his shoulders tight. But he didn't walk away. He didn't tell me to leave, that was enough. We sat on a bench as Caleb ran toward the swings. Evan and I didn't talk about the past. Not yet. We talked about his job, about the rain in Portland, about raising kids in a world like this. At one point, he pulled the bracelet from his pocket and turned it over in his hand. "It never fit me," he said. "It wasn't supposed to," I replied. "It was a placeholder." He looked at me. "For what?" "For a name. One I should have said out loud a long time ago." I stood, heart pounding, and walked to the edge of the grass where Caleb was now climbing a rope ladder. I called out, not loudly, but firmly, so that the name could live in the air again. "Evan!" He turned, and for the first time he smiled, a real one. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how many meetings we'll have, how many silences we'll sit through, how many words we'll still have to speak or leave unsaid. But I will show up, because some names are worth saying, even if it takes a lifetime to find the courage, even if you have to whisper them into the silence, even if it's the only thing you leave behind.